Anyhow, with that news out of the way, we're taking a look over down to Chile. We're joined by Paz Peña for her keynote, Just Digital Transition, Latin American Perspectives on ICTs and the Age of Climate in a Ecological Crisis. Now, this is going to be really interesting. Paz Peña is a consultant on the intersectional nature of tech, feminism, and social justice. For the last 5 years, her focus has been the relationship between ICT and the ecological and climate crisis damage that's happening down there in Latin America. So it'll be really interesting. Let's welcome her in with a great big round of applause before she gets started. Fantastic. And with that, Paz, I'm going to mute myself and it's going to be over to you. You'll have about 40 minutes and then there'll be some questions just at the end. See you in a moment.
Hi, how are you doing? I hope you can hear me well. Cool. So I hope you're having a good summer school. I envy you. I see you on the screen with your, summer clothes. I am with my sweater here in Santiago in winter. So I hope you are all having a good time there. So I just first want to start saying that I'm as you said before, no, I'm not from the academia. I work as a consultant, and basically my interest in the climate and ecological crisis is about how ICTs, public policies can respond to that crisis, no? So I know it sounds a little bit crazy at this age to believe in public policies, but what I can do is my job. So that is basically my approach to the issue. And I'm especially interested in what is the role of Latin America in this new scenario, this new geopolitical scenario, as we're going to see. And in that context, how public policies can respond to the crisis. So I want to begin this presentation by reflecting on one of the most, I would say, significant things I learned when I started working on climate and ecological crisis issues some years ago. So when in 2018, I set out to dedicate a special time to look at the intersection between digital technologies and the climate and ecological crisis, I soon learned, particularly from the indigenous territorial movements affected by mining in the context of energy transition, especially in the north of Chile with lithium extraction, something that has been a fundamental principle in analyzing the role of digital technologies in the face of the ecological disaster. And it is basically about the serious problem that is generated by approaching the crisis as a crisis caused only by the emissions of greenhouse gases. This approach is dominant today, especially in the industrialized Western world. I would say that it is a robust approach, even in certain parts of the global environmental movement. And its dominance is such that we can see this approach in almost all global policies on the subject, especially in ITC public policies. So in other words, with this approach, the sixth extinction is viewed only from the point of view of greenhouse gas emissions, meaning only a residual problem of capitalism and one that is solved by adjusting the system. That is, for example, by preventing emissions with electric vehicles or green energies, or by taking carbon out of the atmosphere, etc., etc. And while I'm, far from considering that wrong, it is a biased approach that brings several harmful consequences at the level of digital technologies. And the most important consequence of that approach is that talking only about climate crisis focused on greenhouse gas emissions favors the ideology of technological fix to social problems. And by this, I'm not even saying that technology will not be vital in accompanying communities, in mitigating the crisis, or even in how we deal with greenhouse gases. But I am mainly referring to two problematic things. No? One is that to demand only the stop of using fossil fuels, making any techno-capitalist solution automatically green and desirable. And this is because it is easy for large technology corporations to hide all their social environmental costs because it's relatively easy for them to buy green energy. Otherwise, it is a perfect argument for techno-capitalism to paint itself as sustainable because issues like energy efficiency are beginning to be the only priority, but also the only criteria for sustainability. And again, what we all know here, all this ignores the enormous socio-environmental costs of green energies, and which have been denounced, especially by indigenous and territorial movements of the South, and which highlight the persistent separation between technology and nature, which we know is a colonialist domination project, where the latter is only seen as a resource at the service of the need of certain human beings. And in these times, those human beings in the global north need to be green, and the South has to provide natural resources for that. So in addition, thanks to the work of these social movements and independent academia, the socio-environmental costs of techno-fixes have gradually been recognized, but this acknowledgement still lacks a substantial social justice approach. So as we can see now in the screen, in this document by the UNCTAD, talking about twin transitions, socio-environmental impacts are some sort of a possibility more than a condition for the existence of capitalism. But in addition to favoring techno-fixes, this approach to see the environmental problem of ICTs only as greenhouse gas emissions, this implies providing more power to the handful of private corporations that today dominates techno-capitalism. And this is hardly mentioned, I will believe, in almost all ICT policies around climate and the ecological crisis. Let us look, for example, now in the screen, at the most important suppliers of the technologies that, according to UNCTAD, will be part of the answers to the climate crisis. So look at that. The players are repeated: Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, etc. They are constant players in every frontier tech, big data, blockchain, 5G, etc. We also can appreciate the geopolitical context behind them. Who are the countries playing a role here? So it's mainly the US and China. Some companies are from the EU, but it's mostly about the US and China. So the concentration of power is not only about, in a way, the privatization of the climate and ecological crisis, but also, if you can see here, it's about sidelining responses from other countries, for example, from the South. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I learned early on that the focus should not only be on climate crisis, because what we are facing is rather a systematic climate and ecological crisis, which involves much more than a greenhouse gas emissions, which are an important part of our problem, but are not the only problem. We are facing the consequences of having exceeded planetary limits, which has led us to the displacement of humans and non-humans and extinction of species and indigenous communities for the sake of capitalist progress and growth. This more systematic look at the crisis can be seen in Latin America critical studies on the Anthropocene and the Capitalocene. And in fact, I argue that these Latin American critical approaches can give essential clues when discussing sustainability in digital technologies. So, for example, the Colombian feminist anthropologist and one of my favorites, Astrid Ulloa, in a paper, very important paper discussing the Anthropocene or Capitalocene in Latin America, states something very important regarding the planetary nature of the crisis. No? So Ulloa says that we cannot understand the role of our continent, Latin America, in both conceptualizations, Anthropocene and Capitalocene, without considering the extractivist practice of capitalism and its global chains in which we are inserted. And by the way, the continuity of those extractivist practices in global policies on the climate crisis. Along the same lines, the Mapuche and Chilean linguists Elisa Loncón, in one of her latest books, As Mapu, which talks about the contribution of Mapuche philosophy to the current scenario, reminds us that we are not only facing a climate crisis, but also a crisis of dispossession of knowledge. Extractivism is complemented by the fact that we have been denied other forms of cultures, languages, development, and economies. Other forms of relationships with our environment have been, in a way, exterminated. So, in this framework, for me, a fundamental question in the intersection of digital technology and the climate and ecological crisis is what extractivist and or dispossession practices are created and or replicated in sustainable digital technologies. So, for example, when we talk about zero emissions technologies and fossil fuel-free technologies, what extractive and dispossession practices are we witnessing? But this is not the only fundamental question we can have from the Latin American perspective, I would say. So Astrid Ulloa reminds us that we must recognize alternative proposals present in the struggles and demands of indigenous people, Afro-descendants, peasants, and urban dwellers here in Latin America, which, by the way, includes discussions around environmental knowledge and problems. And in these alternative proposals, there are territorial and non-human conceptions which rethink power relations in which non-humans are living beings with the capacity for political action. So human supremacy is not a possibility. Meanwhile, Elisa Loncón, recapturing the role of Mapuche philosophy, underlines the absolute necessity of decolonizing thought and our relations facing the climate and ecological crisis. If something has to become extinct, let it be the Eurocentric thinking. So at this point, another critical question from Latin America is, to what extent do sustainable technologies replicate human supremacy? And in my opinion, this is one of the most difficult questions to answer, especially when we look at the greenwashing campaigns of techno-capitalism. I strongly recommend you to look for Cisco campaigns on YouTube around sustainability, which are super interesting, no? And they are, at least to talk about non-humans and the necessity of Cisco to, respect nature, etc., etc. It's a very, very interesting approach, and I think they are really, capturing all these alternative language for the sake of capitalism. So both questions are part of a fundamental contemporary discussion on justice, no? Which is so present in the energy transition by communities affected by the extractivism behind green technologies, no? Who ends up paying the price for the climate goals of the countries that caused the climate and ecological crisis is a question about racial and non-human justice. However, the question of justice in the digital transition is almost absent, especially again in public policies. So the example of the twin transitions allows us to understand the sustainability in ICTs is not only a technical issue, but a question of social justice in all its depth. So first, the twin transition is becoming a dominant approach within institutions such as the OECD or UNCTAD, no, who are strongly supporting it. And even more important, with the European Commission as its most, I will say, important promoter. No? So in the later case, in the case of European Commission, the twin transition means that for Europe to have a transition to green energy, it is essential to have another transition, the digital transition, of equal size and importance. One is codependent on the other. And all of us who have studied the subject can at least understand that there is no scientific consensus that digital technologies always leverage energy efficiency. The 2022 IPCC mitigation report actually says super clearly that the problem is that we don't know yet. No, we don't have enough evidence to do that affirmation. But let's think beyond greenhouse gas emissions by or facilitated by ICTs. Let's consider what extractivist and or dispossession practices are replicated in the twin transitions led by the European Commission. So Europe wants to be a protagonist in the hegemonic dispute over the 21st century economy, which is being determined by the generation of green energy and the production of ICTs in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. But Europe also wants to banish its dependence on Russian gas along the way. For all that, it's necessary not only to have new mineral suppliers for the green energy and the technological industry, but also create new markets for techno-capitalism. So when the geopolitical momentum of the twin transition is verified, it seems more or less obvious to ask the question from Latin America about all these extractivist and dispossession logics that I have just mentioned. No? Who bears the burden of the digital transition for Europe to meet its climate and geopolitical goals? Who bears that burden? The European Commission talks, of course, in their documents about justice for the twin transition. But the idea of justice, of course, has a very limited focus. I will almost say, in this case, that they are using some sort of a broad approach to justice and ethics as an excuse to open new technology markets for Europe. What in all these documents, in all these public policies from the European Commission around twin transition, what is the space for a diverse, planetary, human and non-human justice when the techno-capitalist logic dominates in the Capitalocene? So in this sense, I share the concern of post-human feminists, such as Rosy Braidotti, who sees an urgent necessity at the need to build generative links between the sixth extinction and the fourth industrial era. Because if we continue on the path of techno-capitalism as a natural ally of climate mitigation plans, the road will continue to lead us to the abyss. So Braidotti says, and I'm quoting 2019 interview, unfortunately, the fourth revolution and the sixth extinction are even more disconnected. My favorite example, says Rosy Braidotti, is Bitcoins and cryptocurrency. Wonderful technology, but one calculation finds that blockchain uses as much electricity as the whole of Iceland. So should it exist? From the perspective of sixth extinction, the fourth industrial age looks like suicide, unless we seriously start looking at redistribution along non-human lines as well as human lines. This is why the question of social justice, human and non-human, should be a fundamental guide for any look at the sustainability of technologies. Moreover, this is part of a critical tradition from Latin America that is expressed in, its attempts to feed technodiversity and should also pollinate, I would say, European discussions. So in this part of the world, we can find a vast catalog of non-capitalist digital technologies, from indigenous community networks to transfeminist technologies and technological principles that seek other relationships with communities and their territories, and that rescue forms of relationships that have survived, in a way, capitalist and neoliberal modernization. For example, there is the work of technology by Yasnaya Aguilar, a linguist from Ayutla Mixe in Oaxaca, Mexico. So Aguilar says in a very, very beautiful article that she wrote in 2020, and I'm quoting, we must focus on technologies based on collaborative labor more than on competition. As peoples of Abya Yala, we are experienced in this strategy, which I call technology. If the world were to listen to the people of Abya Yala and adopt this new technological vision, we could perhaps escape the digestive system that so threatens our world's climate and endangers human life. So in my opinion, the important thing about these technological projects is that they contribute to technodiversity. What Yu Hui, this Chinese philosopher, would call the technological biodiversity that seems almost devastated by the universal dominance of techno-capitalist logic. The important thing here for me is not whether these different projects are successful, because the measure of success has to be readapted to territorial needs, but also because failures help the biodiversity flourish. This is something I also discuss in depth in my book, Tecnologías para un planeta en llamas, which can be translated as Technologies for a Burning Planet, which came out this year, and take a closer look at examples and agendas proposed to face a just digital transition in the capital scene. So in the book, I argue that a just digital transition should advance a political program that at least contemplate two things. One, controlling the power and dominance of techno-capitalism. First, because techno-capitalism defends a project of capitalist domination that has led us to the crisis. Second, because it seeks to have even more power in the climate and ecological crisis, which seems suicidal for me. And third, because the demand for resources for the deployment of its infrastructure is basically unsustainable. And second, we need public policies, we need to advance in public policies that leverage technodiversity to feed technological biodiversity as an urgent counterweight to avoid extinction. So I don't want to speak more. I want to hear your comments and questions. So my time here is ending, and we can discuss more later. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Fantastic, Paz. Thank you so much for giving us that insight from Latin America. It's quite often, especially post-COVID, that we find a lot of our work is siloed. We tend to stay within our own echo chambers, and although we try to get out of that, it's really nice to have insight from someone who's actually over there seeing things firsthand and researching about it. So thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Brilliant. I'm going to run around and I'm going to hand the questions over. You may have to meet me in the middle of the court and go away.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you for your presentation. And I have two questions. I mean, it's a sub question. So the first question is regarding, as you mentioned, like greenwashing and technology capitalism. So my question is, what do you think and what would you suggest, considering Chile is the country which has the largest supplier, exporter of lithium and copper, more than 60% and 40% in the world. And how would you manage that? Will you remove the mining sector and promote the other aspect? Because then it will cause losing the job of the people who are involved in mining. And the second question is, considering the political aspect, like for example, you have in Brazil, which is like there's a Bolsonaro and Lula, and in Chile, it's a Chile Vamos. What do you think, like, because once the political party changes, the policy also changes. How can you create a balance and how can you create a long-term investment when you see like every political party has a different economic aspect and also public policy aspect? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that governments in this part of the world have a very difficult role to play. So, for example, in Chile, we have this sort of left-wing government led by President Gabriel Boric, who, when he started his mandate, said that his government was a ecological, environmental government, in a way to say, no? So this year, I think in April, Gabriel Boric published the new national strategy of Chile around lithium, no? Which is something so important today for the development of the country, because as you said, no, lithium is Chile is one of the most important sources of lithium in the world. I think it's the second producer of lithium, no? And the discussion in Chile around lithium, especially from public policies, has been around who is the one who gonna extract the lithium, private corporations or the state, no? Actually, Chile has a lot of experience on state extractivism around copper, for example, no? Codelco is the biggest enterprise extracting copper. So what the left wing wanted to do around lithium was actually to feed the state extractivism, no, of lithium. So if you can see, the discussion is not about social justice around this extractivism of lithium to have this green transition for the global north. The discussion of the left wing and the right wing is about who is going to extract the lithium. So you can have state extractivism or private extractivism, but the discussion is not around if we want to have a country that is only extractivist about natural resources, no? So when the public policy on lithium, the strategy of lithium was published in April, But what's very interesting to see is that I think it was in January of this year, the German Prime Minister came to Chile. And I will say that this is the first time I ever heard that a Prime Minister from Germany came to Chile, like in years, no? And he came in January, and just a couple of months later, Chile published this national strategy. And the thing is that Germany is actually the biggest buyer of our lithium because of the energy transitions that Germany is leading with electric vehicles, no? So what I'm saying here is that it's very difficult for a country like Chile, which is a very small country, to even have a critical view on green transition of the global north. No, it's very difficult to say, you know what, I'm not gonna give you all the lithium, or I'm not gonna extract all the lithium because the cost, the social and environmental cost of that is very high in indigenous community in the north of Chile. Because to say that is almost suicidal for the planet, you will say, no? We need lithium for the green transition. So I think it's very difficult for a country like us to even have a, you know, a critical point of view with that, especially in the level of governments. But I also believe that we necessarily need to hear communities, what they have to say around this, no? And this is something that has been a constant critique from the indigenous communities around the government, but also around the international governments looking for lithium. So the strategy, the national strategy of Chile around lithium was made, I would say, looking very closely the necessities of the global north, but the dialogue needed to have a more just a more just energy transition with local communities, indigenous communities, that dialogue didn't happen in the depth that the communities will expect to, no? And that is a critique, a very important critique, and I think it's something that you can actually, as a government, can display very easily. But I think even in this left-wing government, that doesn't happen. That didn't happen as we would like it, no? So I think it's very difficult to have some sort of a critical view. And as you said, no, the problem that I think we have today, even if we have a right-wing government or a left-wing government, in the case now in Chile, probably the next government will be a right-wing government. The problem is that nobody is actually discussing around extractivism. So extractivism is something that we don't discuss. It's something that we actually do. And this is a very easy way for the global north actually to get what they want in terms of natural resources, no? And I think that is a problem, of course, of our countries in a way that we plan our development, but also I think it's a super convenient thing for the global north to have it, no? To have countries that doesn't discuss extractivism, at least at the level of government. So I do believe that the problem that we are having today in this part of the world is that no matter what government you have, extractivism is a logic that is very difficult to overcome in the way of the development. And that is the biggest, I will say, struggle that we have in terms of public policies, no? How we can actually introduce, you know, robust critiques of around extractivism with these governments that, deny the idea of, having another model of development, that overcome these extractivist logics.
Thank you for that answer, Paz. We do have a few other questions as well. Let's take a look. We have one just there in the middle, and I think there was one at the back too.
Thank you for your interesting talk. You had this one definition on a slide that non-human beings are living beings with, or non-humans are living beings with the capacity for political action. And I was wondering if you could give us an example of the the living being and the political action associated with it.
Sure. So I would say there's a lot of examples around how non-human actors have political influence in Latin America in all levels, I would say. And not only necessarily because of indigenous traditions around this, which you can find in almost every indigenous communities and peoples in all around Latin America. But I will say you can find that in even modern public policies today. So I always remember something that for me is very interesting to see. So in the last Chilean uprising social movement back in 2019, there was a lot of protests, around the country, and there was some sort of a symbol of protest that was a black dog called Matapacos. The dog was called Matapacos, which is basically a killer dog. It was a black dog, a stray dog, who became, for no matter what, a symbol of protest. And it was so interesting to see that Perro, the Matapacos dog, was, a symbol of, in the walls and in the media. This black dog was so important for protesters, etc., etc. And the symbol was so big, actually, that was a whole political discussion, and it's an actual political discussion today, the role of this black dog, so this black dog has like different sort of figures around the city. So the right wing started to burn those figures of the dog, because this was a symbolic dispute over the protest, etc., etc. So the whole public discussion around the protest, but also around the right of protest, the freedom of expression, etc., was all around this black dog, the Matapacos dog, which it in a way show how important it is, the non-human actors in the political life of our everyday, And that is something that you can also find, for example, in the discussion of lithium in the north of Chile, where the discussion today is not only that extractivism is actually is provoking the displacement of indigenous communities because of the lack of water. Let's remember that lithium mining is all about water. But it's also about the extinction of different non-human species. And non-human species in indigenous communities have a very strong presence, in their development, not only in their development as peasants, etc., but also as a political actors with a voice in terms of their development. So it's something that you can also see so commonly in indigenous discussion around extractivism. But I would say that is, again, something that you can find very easily in the modern discussion of policies in all our countries. So this idea of non-humans with political power is something that is very present. And it also reminds me of something that Chakrabarti, this Indian intellectual, says about the Anthropocene. No, he says something like, so with the Anthropocene, the human being is a geopolitical force, and the planet is a political actor. No, this is actually what is happening today. No, the planet, the non-human, is a political actor that we are not, unfortunately, listening in the way we plan our public policies, at least.
Thank you, and thank you for that brief introduction to a bit of Chilean political history with the whole black dog thing. Unfortunately, being in England, like, we never really learned about South American politics. I'm not sure if it's the same in Europe, but it's really interesting to know, like, the unique political backgrounds that you guys have there. It's really interesting. Why is everyone laughing at me?
Because you said you in Europe.
Well, we left Europe, didn't we? Brexit means Brexit.
Yeah.
Brexit means Brexit, man. You voted. For better or for worse. Anyhow, further questions. I think there was a few more, one or two more. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My question was about techno diversity. When you say techno diversity, do you think electronical technologies? And if you think in electronical technologies, how to achieve it locally with a local power, given the fact that the manufacturing of such technologies is a really complex and globalized process that can only be achieved by a really powerful company.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part, because I completely lost it?
Okay. My question is, if you think in in ICT, when you think about diversity, how to manage the fact that this type of technology can only be manufactured with complex and globalized processes, and these complex and globalized processes are only available for really powerful companies.
Yeah. A very interesting question. Yes. Yes, that is the complexity, and that's why I think it's important to also, meanwhile you are trying to advance in feeding technodiversity, you also need to control the power of big tech companies. And I'm saying that this especially because big tech companies have the power in all the global production chain of technologies, including the deepest infrastructure where all technologies are actually sustained. So I do believe that is something that we can. So when you think about technodiversity, you need to actually think about the big players and how to control their power. And this is something so important, especially for this part of the world where infrastructures such as cables are almost completely dominated by big techs. So I do think that this is such a big and complex problem. And that's why I do believe that you cannot think about public policies around technodiversity without actually addressing the problem of power of big tech. So in a way, if you try to think about sustainable ICTs, you also need to address the issue of power around these big companies, no? And that's why I also am super, and I would say the most worrying thing for me today is that the power of this big tech is increasing. Meanwhile, we are thinking that digitization, any digitization, is necessarily good mitigation strategy for the climate and ecological crisis, as the twin transition in the European Commission is, being stated. So I think that instead of controlling the power of these big players, we are giving them the possibility to grow in this dominance, and that is something that for me is really worrying, and is something that can actually affect, as you can believe, the idea and the necessity of technodiversity, which I believe is something especially needed to actually have biodiversity in technology as a way to avoid the extinction crisis.
Thank you. I actually have a question myself on the geopolitical nature of discovering such a large reserve of, rare earth minerals that are really expensive and valuable. But before we get to that, I think there's probably a more prominent question on IT usage.
I have a follow-up question on the
Yep.
part.
I'll get as close as I can. Meet you in the middle. Oh,
Hello, and thank you for such a wonderful talk. It was really inspiring. And I just wanted to follow up on the control part, since you're talking about control. Can you give us some examples of how we can exercise that control, and who is responsible for exercising the control that you talked about?
The control, you said the control, no?
Yeah. So
governance or
yeah, so you're mentioning control a lot, and I'm just wondering what control we're talking about, and how and who should be controlled.
Cool, thanks. Let me think. I think the problem that we have today with the dominance of big tech in every aspect of the way we think about technologies. No, let me reframe this. The problem is not necessarily big tech, but the problem is techno-capitalism, in a way that is this economic logic around the deployment of any technology that actually look for growth, no? And growth is translated in this case of, growing data to process, and that's a huge amount of data needs a lot of infrastructure that we know demands energy, but also demands fresh water, demands minerals, etc., etc. And also, the first thing is that for me, the problem is the logic of techno-capitalism behind today almost every idea of technology. Actually, I don't know how it's in your countries, but in the case of Chile, for example, if you want to have money to develop your technological project and you go to the state to ask for money, the state will say, okay, let me understand what is your growth strategy, because we cannot think about technologies without that techno-capitalist logic. So this is something that for me is very important to have in mind. So The problem of control in here is that the nature of techno-capitalism is about the concentration of power. No, that's why big tech is something that is so relevant in techno-capitalism today. That is the nature of, you know, the financial market, etc. It's about the concentration of power in a handful of actors. No, that we can see. We saw it in the presentation. No, the UNCTAD show it super clearly. No, there are like 24 or 23 big companies that today have the power to basically control, you know, the development of technology, no? The ways that we answer questions around different issues, no? And that is for me something very, very dangerous, again, as I said before, in the context of the climate and ecological crisis, because what we are seeing today is that governments are given these big tech companies the possibility to actually answer questions around climate crisis that should be discussed by people, no, by nations, by communities, and not by private actors. No, so for me that is something so important. That's why I believe that technodiversity is a very interesting concept, especially in terms of giving territorial communities the possibility of control their own technologies, no? Taking care of their own necessities and of course of their own environment, no? So I do believe that control is something very important actually to discuss in the context of sustainability and ICTs.
Thank you for that insight. Further questions over here? We do have around 5 minutes left, but it's okay. We have some questions and take our time through them.
Thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring, especially on technodiversity, as it is a concept that we tackled last year at SICT. So it's been more interesting to see it here. I was wondering, so you explained this link between ICT, colonialism, and this technodiversity concept. I was wondering how you, as an independent consulting person, you empower the people in your country. Do you develop all the technologies with them to make this technodiversity concept real? Yeah, what is your job on that? What are you doing?
I think I understand the question because I have a problem with the audio. I think so I'm an independent consultant and I work on public policies. And again, I do understand when people say, do you really believe in public policies? Because I know in this moment in our life that public policies seems to be always late. And with face with right-wing governments and whatever, like public policies, I don't know if they have sense, but I do believe that you have different options in your life. You can be a practitioner of technologies, you can be a researcher around sustainability and ICTs, etc., etc. So in that general perspective, I think in a way my role here, because it's my experience in a way, is to try to push for public policies, but public policies that actually feed the idea of technodiversity. And for me, actually, what I said before, when I go to the government of Chile and I want to develop a technological, project, they will ask me for techno-capitalist logics behind that project, no? And I think that if we can actually change that little bit, no, of ways to think about technologies, if we can actually intervene in the way that success is measured when you present a technological project in the state, I think that could, do the difference, especially in the context of different ICT projects that have been developed here in Latin America, that I know actually, with feminist, transfeminist logics, with indigenous communities developing those. But those projects that are super incredible projects couldn't survive because they didn't find economical support, for example. So if we actually can change that a little bit, I think it could have, it could make the difference. But that's why I try to actually bring this concept of technodiversity in public policies actually as some sort of excuse to actually work on that. But what can I say? I do believe that it's something we can do the difference. But I do believe also that without the support of public policies, but also research, but also practitioners, etc., that actually share some sort of same agenda, we cannot do much difference. So that's why I think it's important, this kind of summer schools, where you can actually see what is the need of researchers, and also see and design some sort of public policies that can actually support the work of those researchers in order to have some sort of state support for the sustainability in ICTs.
Great stuff. So, do we have any last questions, closing remarks before we'd like to leave? Oh, just over there, yeah. So we are almost out of time, so try to keep your question brief if you can, but don't worry.
Good shot. Thank you for all the insight on the geopolitical problems of technology, or basically new technology that we are developing. You also pointed out very accurately the elites of the global south, who are both the left wing and right wing, who wants to extract. And you coming from the activist community, hopefully don't want to extract, right? If I'm correct, or I'm trying to understand what would be a place where you can be happy along with your indigenous colleagues to say this is the true cost of such an important thing to be extracted, and what would that true cost be? Am I clear?
Sorry, I have a problem of echo. So can you repeat the last part, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. My question was, you along with your activist colleagues and indigenous colleagues, if you can even contemplate what would be the true cost of extraction from your land without, or basically without externalizing the cost in a way that would harm anyone. So, because this is a question from all over the world. What would be the true cost of extraction? Can we even put that cost in some way, and how would that be?
Okay, I think I got the question, but I'm not so sure. Sorry.
So
I typed it in Signal if she wants to see it.
if you could check your Signal, we typed out the question. Sorry, the audio isn't perfect.
So no, so sorry, because I have this echo.
Probably because I'm so loud.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Fika. Let me think. I think, as again, no, the the question here, when we talk about extractivism for the digital transition, which is, by the way, it's so important to consider that the same minerals that the green energy transition need are, the same minerals that the ICT industry need. No, so the geopolitical thing is so clear here. No, so when we think about extractivism for the digital transition, we need to understand that the question here is a racial and non-human justice issue, no? So the true costs is basically that indigenous communities, or let's say it's non-white communities, are paying the costs by being exterminated or suffering displacement in order to have the minerals that the global north need. So this is a social justice question. This is the true cost of extractivism. So taking advantage that I'm talking with an European audience. So I think the question here that has to be answered around social justice is a question that also need to be addressed by, for example, European communities, no? Because I do believe that if you go to indigenous communities affected in the north of Chile because of the lithium extraction, but also because of rare earth mineral extraction, or if you go to Guatemala and see how indigenous communities have been displaced because of the pollution produced by the extraction of nickel and rare earth minerals for the digital transition and the energy transition, etc., and you go to different places, you go to the Brazilian Amazon and see how the illegal gold mining is being affecting indigenous communities, gold that has been purchased by Google, Apple, etc. So when you see all these cases and you hear all the indigenous communities, what they are saying that the problem is a problem of social justice, no? We have that information, but I think that we are lacking of what is the view of communities of Europe around this problem of social justice and racial justice, no? And I do believe that we need to have the answer or the different answers from communities in Europe, actually to share that views with indigenous communities here in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, to actually design, or no, not design, but actually to form some sort of a, planetary movement around these social injustice that are held by this digital transition. No, I do believe that we need to do that. And I do believe that we have enough information from what are the true costs of extractivism here, at least in Latin America where I work, no? So I do believe that the next step actually is, what is Europe? What does Europe want in this scenario, no? And that is something that I really believe that we don't have enough information or sharing of information. And I think, and I do believe that this kind of summer schools are an opportunity actually to start to having that kind of sharing of information, because I think that the true costs are already there, no? We already know, but we need more than just know about that information. We need to do the next step, and the next step is actually to have a political agenda across continents to actually address this incredible social and racial justice problem.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Paz. As I mentioned, I did have a more geopolitical question, but I'm going to save that for later. We invite all of our speakers to join our Framer teams, which is just a community online where you can answer more questions if anyone has them or comes up with them later on. For now, though, that brings us to a close. Can we have another massive round of applause? And that brings day 2 of SICT to a close. Thank you for joining us and thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Bye.